Hey guys, welcome to my channel, Six Physique. My name is Joseph, and let's talk about science, yo. Hit it! In order to understand an action potential and how it works, we first need to understand the key players within an action potential. We have sodium and potassium, and those are the two key players that can affect an action potential. In terms of a cell, we have two spaces within the cell. We have the extracellular fluid and the intracellular fluid. So, in the extracellular fluid, which is outside of the cell, we'll just call it ECF, and then inside the cell is called the intracellular fluid. And inside the intracellular fluid, it is more negatively charged because we have a lot more potassium ions inside, and also some proteins that make it more negative. And inside, we base the inside and outside the cell by millivolts. So the inside of the cell has negative 70 millivolts. In order for it to reach an action potential, we have different pumps and different mechanisms that allows the sodium, which is outside in the extracellular fluid, to come into the cell. Something we call a sodium potassium pump. So what we're going to talk now is in regards to the sodium potassium pump. So the sodium potassium pump involves sodium and potassium. Sodium and potassium are not able to go against their concentration gradient, and since they're ionic and they're charged, they cannot transport without the assistance of energy or a channel or a pump. We start with the sodium and potassium pump. It brings sodium from inside the cell to the outside of the cell. So we have lots of potassiums on the outside of the pump, and they want to go inside of the cell. So that's not a problem at all. And inside of the cell, we have sodiums. 3 sodiums leave the cell while 2 potassiums come in. It doesn't happen at the same time, but once the sodiums go out, then the potassiums are able to come in because the conformation of the pump has changed. So what we have here right now is the first step of the sodium potassium pump. So we have let's just think this is the intracellular fluid, which we talked about, and there's lots of sodiums floating around. So these sodiums go into this side of the pump. So we need 3 sodiums in order to leave the cell, and then 2 potassiums to come in. That's the only way it will work. So we take our sodiums and they go inside the pump. In order for the sodium to travel up its concentration gradient and into the extracellular fluid and the extracellular space, it can't do it on its own, right? So we do need a form of energy, and this form of energy that we have in our body, that we all have, is called adenosine triphosphate, which is also known as ATP. And we use a phosphate group. And that phosphate group causes the conformation of the pump itself to change shape in order for the sodium to release. ATP uses a phosphate, so then it turns into ADP, adenosine diphosphate. Triphosphate's 3, di is 2. So it turns into adenosine diphosphate. What happens next? It causes the conformation to change. Before, the conformation of the ATP was like this, and then what the ATP did allowed it to turn this way to let the sodiums go, and then the potassiums will come right in here. So this sodium exits the pump and goes into the extracellular fluid. We have potassiums, and only 2 potassiums are able to go into the pump, which go into the intracellular fluid, into the cell itself. So we have the potassiums that are in here, and this is where the phosphate group actually releases from the pump in order for the conformation of the pump to change. So now it's like this, and it has to go back to this. Now that we have gone through what a sodium pump is, let me go through the different channels that we have in order to help us reach an action potential. So, let's actually first describe what an action potential is. So an action potential will either work 100% or 0%. The all or none principle. So everything will be working all the time or it will not work at all. Think of it as the graph, which helps out a lot. So with the graph, there has to be, looks like this. So it's in its resting membrane potential, and the resting membrane potential is always at negative 70 millivolts. Always at negative 70 millivolts. And there's a stimulus within the cell and the environment around the cell that causes it to possibly reach an action potential. So the way the action potential works is basically sodium comes into the cell from the extracellular space, and if it surpasses negative 55 millivolts, then we can begin our action potential. In order to reach an action potential, we need to have our voltage gated channels working all the time. I mean, working at this moment, they need to fire up and work 100%. So the voltage gated channels basically bring sodium into the cell. So if there's not enough sodium going through the channel, then therefore we are not able to reach an action potential, and the action potential will not surpass negative 55 millivolts. And when the action potential does not surpass negative 55 millivolts, we call this a graded potential. So now if we continue with our graph, so let's assume that we reached the action potential and the voltage gated channels have opened and the sodium is rushing into the cell. So this causes the millivolts to increase until it reaches its climax, which is at positive 30 millivolts. After the voltage gated channels open is something that we call depolarization. The cell depolarizes and becomes positive on the inside at positive 30 millivolts. In order for the action potential to go down and for everything to go back to its normal place where the resting membrane potential is at negative 70 millivolts, potassium leaves the cell, and when potassium leaves the cell, we call this repolarization. It always leaves with too much. So the potassium ends up going below negative 70 millivolts, and then we call that hyperpolarization. And what brings the hyperpolarization stage back to the resting membrane potential is what we talked about before, the sodium potassium pumps. So the sodium potassium pumps bring the potassium into the cell as it removes the sodium and brings it outside of the cell. And that's what causes it to go back to its resting membrane potential at negative 70 millivolts. And action potentials can occur and reoccur all the time, and it happens throughout our body continuously and it does not stop. And the action potentials can help us with everything that we do in our life, and they're very beneficial, and I mean, it's part of our body, and it's something that we need, and it's a very important process that must be happening in our body at all times in order to live and do our daily living, right? Thanks for watching my video, and I hope to see you next week. And yeah, all right, have a good day. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and leave me any feedback and comments on what to improve, because I'm very new to this, but I want to get better and I want to be more informative for all of you. So if you have a certain teaching style that you may like, or any feedback at all, let me know, and I will do my best to accommodate and help everybody out, okay?